So I thought I'd do a quick update on the status of the pickup project. This is the Nissan pickup. I used a local shop over in Melton Freewater to clean the block. It was absolutely covered in grease and oil. I pulled the freeze plugs out of it, the PCV pipe, the dipstick, which was interesting because the dipstick tube is bent and the bracket is broke. So these are all things that I'm finding. They did a really nice job cleaning it. I put the original oil filter back on, just sacrificial for painting to cover up things. That is GM blue. It's pretty close to the Nissan color, but it's not quite as teal. And I was able to use the large brushes that I have. It's a Speedway Motors set. An example of these things are how long these brushes are. I mean, they're like really, really long, if that's in focus. So basically, what I did was I pulled this plug here, and there's an oil galley that goes right up the side of the engine. There's that plug, the plug that's supposed to be there. And there's also this hole that goes to this little metering orifice that feeds the tensioner. And once I put the chain back on and everything, all that will be clear, but there's a tensioning system that goes on here that it pushes on. I have not cleaned the top of the block with a gasket scraper yet. I also got a tap to go through all the holes. The big issue with this engine, the block is pretty much bulletproof. The heads are pretty good. It's clamping. They just are known for blowing head gaskets. Some of the information out of the internet says every 50,000 miles, pull the valve cover and undo each head bolt one at a time and retorque it back to factory. And then just do one at a time all the way through. And if you do that periodically, as basically preventative maintenance, the head gaskets will last a long time. If you don't, you're pretty much guaranteed to blow them. Kind of interesting. It is a modern engine, but it's from 1985 also. It's not like the current stuff. On the underneath, I went to my mechanic in Pendleton, and he had a ball hone. We ran a ball hone through the bores. They all looked really good. There's like a little bit of staining in them. That all cleaned up really well. After I pressure washed the block, went through and blew everything out with the air nozzle, got it as dry as I could, and then ran some CRC Power Lube, just as general, kind of W40. Ran that down the bore, wiped down the crank journals here. They don't have bearings in them yet, obviously. This is where the oil pickup tube fits, and this is where the dipstick tube will go. And what I will do is go through here and just lightly kiss all of these holes with a countersink, just to make sure there's no raised edge on them. And then likewise run a tap. Fortunately, these threads here are the same as the head bolts, so the tap I bought, I can use both places. Run a tap through all these, tip it back, blow those out really good with brake clean and compressed air, make sure they're all really clean, and then oil the bolts when I put it together. I picked up the cylinder head today. There is this guy, and then, not sure what I did with the other head. Oh, this is the head that actually came on the truck. And I think I explained earlier that this piece here, that you really can't see in the dark, is cracked. And then these three bolt holes were stripped out. And likewise, the head was warped. So I had him check the head at the machine shop and then used any parts off of the old head. And then this head is one that I got from a wrecking yard, and it was guaranteed rebuildable, but it was not ready to go as it was. So I had the guy do a valve job on it. He ended up reusing some of the valves out of the old head and was able to put it all back together. He said the rest of it looked really good. The cam looks good. I will run some of the red, super slippery, I think it's the Permatex brand, break-in oil or break-in lube. I'll put that on the cam lobes and warm the engine up and then check the hot lash on all the valves. Basically, I have it sitting on 2 blocks of wood because I believe it's, yeah, this valve here, this would be an exhaust valve, is actually slightly protruding with the way the cam is. So just to keep from bending any of the valves, setting it on a bench, I just put it on a couple of blocks to take care of it. couple of tools I bought to help with putting the engine back together is this little guy, and this is adjustable. Obviously these 3 adjusting screws, and what this is for doing is to put rings down in the cylinder, and then you can use this to square them up for checking the end gap on them. A lot of times you can also use a piston with a connecting rod, tip it over, slide it down it, or square up the ring. This tool is much easier, but basically each one of those will be squared up, and you check the end gap on it, and then refer back to the service manual to see if you have enough clearance. And if you don't, you have this little guy. And basically, this is a rotary cutter. There's a lever in here, and that wheel spins. It's just an abrasive disc. And because the rings are circular, as you put it up in here and it hits these 2 rings, you can squeeze it gently against this surface as you spin the crank, and in a really controlled fashion, you can basically grind the ends of the rings until you get them just correct, or just so, and then you take the burr off with a regular file. And you go through and do all that because you absolutely do not want any of the rings to close up when it's running, because if they do, you're guaranteed to break them. I was excited to get the rings for the pistons last week and ran into a little issue. What I didn't notice was, if you look at the box, see where it says 1 CYL for 1 cylinder? The picture that was actually on Summit Racing's website was of a box like this, but it was 3 times as big. So my mind latched onto that, and for whatever reason, I thought it was for a set of rings. Well, it is, but it's only for 1 piston. So I had to order 3 more sets, and it's basically another 2 to 3 weeks out because they're special order. I forgot to show you how to put one of these oil galley plugs in. So this is actually drilled all the way down through the block, and then intersecting that are these passages that go to the actual crank, and then via that into the connecting rods. So what I did is drilled these out. That's all it is. I just drilled that out and then pulled both of them out before I had the block cleaned. That way I could run one of those long brushes down in it. So I just use a little bit of this. It does not take much. I would almost say less is more. You just want a super thin coating. What you don't want is so much that when you drive this in, somehow it ends up scraping off some of it inside the block, and then that floats around in there and gets sealed in a bad place. My shop teacher from back in high school had an International, I think it was a 396 block, and it's a V8, and it's cross drilled, has oil galleys going that are cross drilled, and the guys that rebuilt that block put so much goo on there, the regular blue Permatex, when they put the galley plugs back in and they screwed in, they basically look like little 22 caliber bullets. When I screwed that in, that little bit on the end was loose, and literally when he started the engine, it just pushed that straight into the crank oil galleys. Fortunately, he caught it, but he had almost no oil pressure in the crank, and that's kind of hard to diagnose. So he ended up having to completely strip the thing all the way down. So we'll do that. And then I want it to where it's just either dead flush or like a thousandth below the surface. I don't want to drive it in too far, but you also don't want it So I'm just finishing up the last of the main cap tapping. Basically, it's a good idea to run a tap down through all these threads to clean up any dirt and if there's any corrosion or anything, and you blow them all out. And then when you go and put your caps on with lube threads, you're going to get the most accurate torque readings that you can. The other things I've done this afternoon are put in all of the freeze plugs. They're really called core plugs. And those are those silver plugs I put in the side of the engine block. Those are ostensibly to knock all the sand out of the cores when they make the blocks. It's pretty fascinating if you pull up YouTube on how cast iron castings are made. Nissan and I think Toyota uses a pretty high nickel content cast iron, so the blocks tend not to need to be bored as much as the classic Chevys and some of the other engines. I also went through and put tape on the oil galleys just to make sure we didn't get any dirt in there. Underneath this piece here is a really coarse woven screen, and that's part of the crankcase breather. And this baffle plate is meant to stop a lot of the oil vapor and whatnot and then just have it drip. Remember, the block is upside down, so it'll drip out of here back into the oil pan when the engine's running. I had to touch up one spot, the paint, a little bit there, put in the core plug on the back of the block, and what I've been doing is putting tape over things so I don't forget them.